1991 was an eventful year in video game history. The market-leading Nintendo made its next push to enter the 16-bit market with the US launch of the Super NES. They failed to gain total control over the 16-bit market thanks to a new spiky blue hero on Sega's front. The following year would be crucial for the entire industry. Was Sonic a one-hit wonder? Or would Sega stand their ground against Nintendo? Development, management, and marketing would all be tested in this big chapter in the console wars. With the immense success of the original Sonic, one would think that everything was done to keep the development team together and ask them to produce a follow-up. But the opposite was true. The three main team members went their separate ways, and with the months ticking away, there was much to be done on the sequel. A key figure that got the gears moving was Mark Cerny, head of Sega Technical Institute, STI for short. This was Sega's first Western-based development studio and opened its doors in 1990. The core concept was to hire young, aspiring local talent who would receive training from the best minds Sega of Japan had to offer. Together, they would develop original and creative titles with the Western audience in mind. Sonic's game designer Hirokazu Yasuhara was one of the initial members asked to join the team. He ultimately made the move a year later after finishing up Sonic, as he was ready for a new chapter in his career. Being the head of an important development studio, Mark Cerny met up with his colleagues in Japan on a regular basis. During one of his visits, he was shocked to hear that Yuji Naka, one of the main forces behind Sonic, had left Sega. Mark met with the talented programmer and learned of his frustration with higher management. The two men had worked together in the Master System game division in the 80s and became good friends. Their friendship ultimately resulted in Yuji Naka rejoining Sega at STI. There he would be shielded from involvement and critique from Sega of Japan and offered a satisfying bonus structure. In September of 1991, Yuji Naka made the move to California, where he was reunited with his fellow Sonic team member Hirokazu Yasuhara. The first big step to assemble a team was set, but the official approval to start production on Sonic 2 had yet to come. With no new project assigned, our duo would spend their time wisely doing pre-production and tests for an eventual sequel. Yuji Naka successfully figured out a way to realize two-player split-screen gameplay utilizing a special interlaced graphical mode of the Mega Drive. In this high-resolution mode, the console renders two entire game screens on top of each other. The portrait-shaped image is squashed to a standard 4:3 ratio when displayed on a television. Yasuhara started with visualizing gameplay and story ideas not bound to any release schedule. His big vision revolved around the element of time travel. Robotnik went back in time to alter Mobius's future, and it was up to our blue hero to chase him throughout time and prevent him from turning the island into an evil Eggman empire. The game was supposed to feature multiple time periods, each with their own overworld map and selection of zones. There were at least 17 different zones planned in this original design document. In November of 1991, marketing and management finally realized the urgency to start production and counter Nintendo's lineup. The pressure at STI was high from the start, as the launch date was set to October 1992, meaning that the team had 5 months less compared to the original. It became clear that the time travel concept was too ambitious for the tight schedule and the appointed 8 megs of cartridge space. They therefore went with a more streamlined game plan akin to the original game. A great number of ideas for zones were still kept, such as Oil Ocean, Casino Night, and Metropolis Zone. A glimpse of the time travel element can still be seen in Hilltop Zone. This was supposed to be a prehistoric version of Emerald Hill, and thus they share the same basic look. At the start of 1992, our duo was reinforced with new talent. Among them was lead designer Yasushi Yamaguchi, who already showcased his design skills on numerous Mega Drive titles. He took over the role of Naoto Oshima, who had stayed in Japan. The switching of art directors led to a slight departure in graphical style and a less pronounced CGI look. Yamaguchi also had a big hand in updating Sonic's look and creating an array of new badniks. The project literally became his life for the next 9 months as he worked long hours to produce the bulk of the game's artwork. A group of talented local junior artists also joined the project. Hiring US-based talent was in line with the studio's mixed culture vision, but was also born out of necessity. Some of the Japanese team members were not able to directly make the move to California due to problems with their visas. The language barrier caused for some problems, but overall the team worked together smoothly with Mark Cerny stepping in as a translator. Together with Yuji Naka, he oversaw the whole production. Lead designer Yamaguchi supervised the design team and handed them concept art and rough pencil sketches as reference for their pixel art. Typically, the pixel artist would sketch out various elements in more detail before starting the labor-intensive process of drawing the pixels on the computer. All pixel art was created on Sega's proprietary system called Digitizer, a custom hardware setup with paint and animation tools directly catered to the Mega Drive hardware. One of the biggest challenges in creating art in those days was the limited amount of storage space. The artwork for each zone had to be broken up in small building blocks called tiles. A complete tile set was hardly larger than a single screen, but could be used to build an entire zone. In specialized level editing software, the individual tiles were grouped together to form larger, repeatable building blocks which were used to construct the whole level. The artist had to be inventive to make them all connect together seamlessly without making it feel repetitive. Level and gameplay designer Hirokazu Yasuhara oversaw this process. He came up with interesting gameplay situations and sketched out the initial layout on grid paper. The pixel art and level layout data file were handed over to the programmers, who incorporated it into the game. All code was written in assembly, which was the norm back then. This resulted in very efficient code, but required a great deal of knowledge of the underlying hardware. For Sonic 2, Yuji Naka reused the engine from the original game but made it even faster. The newly added spin dash move showed off the increased scrolling speed perfectly. Meanwhile, 20 miles northwest from STI, the marketing team at Sega of America wrapped their heads around a fitting marketing strategy. It was their responsibility that word of the game's release would stretch far beyond the hardcore Sega fans. The usual in-store promotions, print, and TV ads were all considered, but they needed something big to break through to the general public, an event that even the mainstream media would pick up. They came up with a global launch date dubbed Sonic Tuesday. Back in 1992, this was never conceived before and would be an industry first. The coming months were spent on figuring out numbers and figures of this logistical nightmare that would have to break all retail traditions. One of the pioneering aspects in Sonic's development was the use of 3D modeling software to create complex graphical assets. For instance, the corkscrew in the opening stage and the animated barrel cage in Metropolis Zone were realized with the help of 3D software. The newly recruited artist Tim Skelly was one of the key members who spearheaded this technique. The most impressive use of 3D software was on the iconic special stages. The roller coaster track was modeled in 3D and rendered to a small series of 2D still images. The images were reduced to roughly a quarter of the console's screen resolution. An artist would trace over the renderings using an 8-color palette, a process which was necessary to be able to compress them effectively and store them on the game cartridge. A programmer would write code to play these tiny low-res images in predefined loops and place the sprites on top for the player to interact with. Like the special stage of the first game, it must have left many of their colleague game developers puzzled as to how they were able to pull this off with Mega Drive hardware. Development began picking up steam, and with a large number of zones planned, it was slated to surpass its predecessor in size, but there was still something missing, a new element that would really set it apart. A new playable side character. Like with the design of Sonic himself, there was an internal competition held to come up with a fitting design for the new character. It was none other than lead designer Yamaguchi who came up with the winning concept. As if he didn't already have his hands full, he sketched out the two-tailed fox loosely inspired by Japanese folklore. The cuteness of Tails complemented the new slightly tougher look of Sonic perfectly, but his name Miles Prower led to a bit of a struggle. After some going back and forth, Madeline Schroeder of the marketing team pitched the name Tails and wrote a little backstory for his character. They all settled on using Tails as his nickname and Miles Prower as his official name. The two-player gameplay was in the project's DNA from the start, but with Tails they found the perfect character to give weight to this concept. The cheeky fox proved to be the ideal character for a younger sibling to join in on the action. Until now, the STI development team had been working largely in secrecy, but the time had come to announce the game to the press, retailers, and public. In early May, Sega organized their annual Sega Summit, cleverly held before the big CES trade show. It was a 3-day luxury and relaxation event set up to bond with their retailers. In a short conference scheduled in between the cocktails and golf matches, they revealed Sonic 2 as well as their plans for a global launch. Luckily, most of the big retailers were supportive and agreed to adapt their long-standing shipping policies, and so a big step was made for this global launch event. On May 28th, the Consumer Electronics Show kicked off. It was one of the most important trading events for the video game industry, held twice a year. Nintendo showed an impressive lineup including Zelda 3, Mario Kart, and Mario Paint. They also announced a huge price drop for the Super NES, which was a clear sign that they were starting to take their competitor seriously. Sega, on the other hand, introduced their new Mega Drive CD-ROM add-on, while their trump card Sonic 2 was demoed in a private screening. The game was still in the middle of development, and thus only an early version of Emerald Hill was playable. Fragments of 3 other zones and the new character Tails were showcased in the pre-recorded demo mode. The gaming press was overall optimistic, and retailers showed confidence in the Sega brand by ordering copies of Sonic 2 in large quantities. One crucial element was still missing in this early build of the game: a new score by composer Masato Nakamura. The up-and-coming bass player was in the middle of recording a new album with his band Dreams Come True in London. He didn't want to disappoint fans, and gave it his all to compose memorable tunes despite his packed schedule. He even came up with a neat concept to compose a crossover theme to link their new album and the game together. Like with the first game, programming the compositions to Mega Drive compatible data was handled by an audio technician from Sega. As the summer kicked in, the development crew crunched their way through the piles of work at hand. The majority of the zone art was finalized, but the layout of levels still needed a ton of work. The flow of a level is incredibly important to any platformer, and even more so in Sonic. The CES version of Emerald Hill still suffered from flow-breaking object placement. One of the improvements made was the removal of the annoyingly placed bug enemies, which were swapped out for the more interesting monkey-shaped badniks. Fine-tuning the zones was an organic but time-consuming process, and with the deadline looming on the horizon, the inevitable moment to cut content drew nearer. Woodzone was the first to be scrapped, even though a large portion of the art was already finalized. Memory and time constraints made it impossible to keep it in the final game. Dusthill Zone was another level that was in the original design docs but did not end up in the final game. It was supposed to feature a weather switch mechanic halfway through, turning the desert into an icy landscape. Interestingly enough, part of the zone would take place underground, and in prototypes, Dusthill was actually replaced by Mystic Cave Zone. As with any creative process, new ideas keep popping up during development. There's a chance that the underground section sparked the imagination and led to the creation of Mystic Cave Zone. The sky-themed zones were the last to enter production, and they added a nice dose of variety to the final act of the game. On the marketing front, things were also shifting to high gear. The big marketing blitz began in September with a teaser campaign called Are You Up To It? In the 3 months leading up to the game's release, anticipation for Sonic Tuesday began to build.
If you just look at the pre-sales, they've sold 750,000 copies on order already. There has been massive anticipation, and clearly it's going to be, it's comparable to the launch of Madonna's sex book, Sonic Tuesday. The shops are going to be besieged with people desperate for Sonic 2.
Print ads and the new high-octane TV campaign made gamers aware of the launch day. Gaming press was also kept in the loop, being sent new information and screenshots each month. These were actually mock-ups carefully constructed by the zone artists of STI to make sure the game looked at its best. The final big part of the plan was focused on retail. Shop owners were sent promotional material, in-store displays, and giveaways for pre-orders. As a special treat, Sonic himself would visit select retail outings and bring a sneak peek copy of the game for kids to play. At STI, the final month of development had started. Test teams worked long hours to guarantee a satisfying and bug-free experience. The dev team made the final tweaks to the difficulty level and added the ending sequence. The game was literally only fully playable just days before the deadline. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough time to finish work on a secret level called Hidden Palace Zone, and therefore had to be abandoned. The player would unlock this mystical zone after collecting all 7 Chaos Emeralds. Once there, they would receive the power to morph into Super Sonic. Because it was removed so late in the process, it was still present in beta ROMs sent to the gaming magazines, leading to hours of speculation by fans years after the game's release. On September 25th, the final release code got approved and ready to be mass-produced. Typically, the manufacturing of game cartridges, boxes, and manuals could take up to 3 months, but the process was sped up to ensure the first 1 million copies were ready before the 24th of November. The Sonic 2 development team was supposed to continue working on a Mega CD port of the game. It was planned to be an extended version with cutscenes and a new soundtrack. Plans changed, and the decision was made to develop a completely new Sonic game by Sega of Japan. A game which, coincidentally or not, did feature a time travel element. The long-awaited day finally arrived. November 24th, better known as Sonic Tuesday, a day that the development team and marketing team had worked towards for a year. The Sonic 2 Airlift delivered over 1 million copies overnight to more than 13,000 stores. Sega fans around the world were already hyped and lined up to get their copy. As a direct result of the global release, Sonic 2 became the best-selling video game on launch day. A story that mainstream press gladly picked up, and so the event and the game got enormous media coverage. The timing couldn't be better. A returning point of discussion during the holiday season are the predictions of hottest holiday gifts. Sonic 2 was still fresh in the minds of journalists and was therefore mentioned frequently. December continued to be a strong month, as Sonic 2 would find its way into the homes of many players, and they were not disappointed. The game expanded on concepts set by the first title and took things further. 2-player support, faster gameplay, and a big secret. Sonic 2 would ship with 11 wildly different zones, which guaranteed a lengthy adventure and hours of fun. It was truly a remarkable effort by the dev team to create a game of this magnitude in such a short amount of time. The tight deadline likely caused them many headaches, but the November launch was necessary to maximize profits from the game's release. This put Sega next to Nintendo in total market share, giving them enough resources to keep on rolling. Both companies would make sure to up the ante in the years to come, with new exciting software and technological innovations, making us, the gamers, the real winner of the console war. Sonic 2 went on to sell over 6 million copies and became one of the most important releases of its generation. The success catapulted the gaming icon into the mainstream and proved that he was here to stay.
Coffee? Tea?
Sega!